boast about our land, saying we have racial integration. We told the world that our country is an example of love, peace, and racial harmony. But all that's now a fate. The country club issue made us wide awake. But that's a drop of water, my friend, in an ocean of discrimination. So please, won't you tell country club? And what must you tell them? Massa, they must them. We want no racialism in our countries, no prejudice or color must divide with this land, must belong to everybody. So tell the Portuguese club to cover our island, to hell with Junction and Chinese Association. These lands only has room for us West Indians. We want no division. Massa, they massa. Country club is joke, there are many more. Our banks give us loans based on our color. You get certain lawyers to defend you in court. The color of your skin or prestige is your passport. Massa in hotel, drinking rum and whiskey, and he living swell. And the poor man catching his tail, and if he thief to live, they throw him in jail. So please, won't you tell them Massas? I want to hear you say, Massa, de Massa. Amen. Too much nepotism going on in these islands. Carnival and Christmas, reminding all them Syrian, and they won't spend a penny to help ISO and Steel Band. Won't you tell the Ministry of Education, stop lining up our children in hot sun, waving flag to some Englishman or Canadian? I am making fun. Massa, de Massa. Let's face the facts, brother, look around. Some youths have jobs, others have none. To get a job, poor girls have to sin. While in most stores and banks, you see one race and same skin. Rich men getting away with cockfight churches, gambling on Harvest Day. And police in your tail whole day, if you only play wacky and wavy. So tell the police that's discrimination. And what is my message? Massa, de Massa. Amen. Mister, don't you call yourself no white man or no Syrian. You're not a Chinese, Englishman or no German. Everyone living in these lands are all West Indians. In all them big shot hotels like in Hilton, there is the price of drinks to keep out the black man. But people still buy them folks and bring in the rum. We are making fun. Massa, de Massa. Governments in the Caribbean must now put a stop to all of this sin. It is time to stop Massa. Everyone must be free to live and enjoy rights here. No more exploitation. Have respect for labor unions. Pay good wages and benefits. It's time that Massa should take his exit. So please, won't you tell the authorities? I want to hear you say, Smiley. Massa. Amen. And tell newspapers all over the Caribbean to printing comics like Handbrake and Tarzan because they degrading the dignity of the black man. And we in the Caribbean have got to know that we are colonial leaders must also with revolutionary thinking is to really grow. Let us stay up, son. Fight churches gambling on harvest day and police in your tail whole day if you only play wacky and wiggy. So tell the police that's discrimination. And what is my message? Massa, amen. Mister, don't you call yourself no white man or no Syrian. You're not a Chinese, Englishman or no German. Everyone living in these lands are all West Indians. In all them big shop hotels like in Hilton, there is the price of drinks to keep out the black man. But we go still buy them folks and bring in the rum. We are making fun. Massa, Massa. Governments in the Caribbean must now put a stop to all of this sin. It is time to stop Massa. Everyone must be free to live and enjoy rights here. No more exploitation. Have respect for labor unions. Labor wages and benefits. It's time that Massa should take his exit. So please, won't you tell the authorities? I want to hear you say, Smiley. Massa, amen. And tell newspapers all over the Caribbean to printing comics like Handbrake and Tarzan because they degrading the dignity of the black man. And we in the Caribbean have got to know that we are colonial leaders must also with revolutionary thinking is to really grow. Let us stay up, son. Massa, Massa.
Say it again.
Bundle and save on insurance. Libbity bibbity.
Swoon.
Swoons.
They used that they were free, and slavery has lost its sting. But they're not foolish, they can see you're lying deeply. Slavery has not left our doors, not yet, I'm sure. We have got to fight the battle some more. The time has come for every man in the Caribbean. Hold one common destiny, designed to make our people free. We have got to stand up for the rights, to lead the lives we choose, to change and answer to refuse. If you think the battle is done, my brother, and you are riding an illusion, an illusion. You talk of progress, love, and justice, peace, and unity. All illusion. We we have no hold on these our native islands. Our hands are tied, we don't control our actions. From the we forward together in a social endeavor, our goal. Social control, we slave no more, we slave no more. Only then we slave no more. We'll beg no more, we'll stoop no more. Only then we cannot live forevermore, subjected from shore to shore, reflecting cowardice and shame against our ancestral name. I didn't know warriors left among us to rise and shine. No heroes left to rise up unto the shrine. No martyrs in our history for the used to do. Scholars died to make us free. Coffee died to make us free. Gandhi died to make us free. Must all these warriors die in vain while we go back to slavery once again? If you think the battle is done, my brother, you are riding an illusion, an illusion. You talk of progress, love, and justice, peace, and unity. All illusion, all illusion. We have no hold on these our native islands. Our hands are tied, we don't control our actions. From the we forward together in a social endeavor, our goal. Social control, we slave no more, we slave no more. Only then we'll slave no more, we'll beg no more, we'll stoop no more. Only then we'll need no more. The struggle has only just begun. We've got to carry on. Uniting these West Indian lands may take us generations. But independent in this region don't mean one down. If we can be independent as one, the economic and policies are disheartening. The people's voices are ringing. We are tired of living a life of total subjection. Told what to spend and what to keep. God knows sometimes we ain't even have enough to eat. If you think the battle is done, my brother, and you are riding an illusion, an illusion. You talk of progress, love, and justice, peace, and unity. All illusion, all illusion. We have no hold on these our native islands. Our hands are tied, we don't control our actions. From the we forward together in a social endeavor, our goal. Social control, we slave no more, we slave no more. Only then we slave no more. We'll beg no more, we'll stoop no more. Only then we'll be
Riding an illusion. Short. Out of Antigua. The man that gave us tourist level and nobody go run me from where we come from. Raising the question of independence. He said, we ride in an illusion. We have no control over these West Indian islands. We ride in an illusion. And before that, shocked us. Dr. Hollis, Liverpool, Massa Day must done. Massa Day must done. Welcome to Politics 101 tonight on a Wednesday night. And we are in the period of independence. It's on the lips of everyone, including the young people. And we cannot avoid it. Welcome, whether you're joining us from in Guyana or outside of Guyana. Please share the live, share the link, let everyone know that we're on tonight. We're getting there. Are we riding an illusion? Is short, correct. Are we riding an illusion when we talk about independence? Are we riding an illusion? Good evening. We're going to talk this through. The coming days and weeks are going to be painful for someone like myself that comes from one of the traditions of our independence that must pick apart our independence journey and do a critical analysis. You see, when the decolonization period, the 40s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, as we get into the 50s and we're getting ready for independence, there were some things that were said. Chuck Duss in his Calypso de Massa was borrowing from Dr. Eric Williams, who took to Woodford Square and made it the University of Woodford Square, and he uttered the battle cry, Massa Day must done. Massa Day must done. And it's one of the sayings in Trinidad. Every Trinidadian, maybe the young people are not so acquainted with it, all of the young people, but if you're Trinidadian, Massa Day must done became a battle cry. Dr. Eric Williams signaling an end to colonialism and saying we are entering into a new era, an era where the days of Massa must come to an end. Massa Day must done. In our Guyana, there were a few sayings. Dr. Chetty Jagan came back and said, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Signaling a Marxist, socialist tendency in our modern politics. It was that battle cry, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, that would ignite the early PPP. And then as elections came under adult suffrage and we entered a period of self-government, limited self-government, the then Sidney King said, this confounded nonsense must stop. This confounded nonsense must stop. A battle cry that, like Eric Williams in Trinidad, who say Massa Day must done, Sidney King was saying, this colonial nonsense must stop. This confounded nonsense must stop. It was laying in the sand, a blueprint for our independence. What he, Sidney King, thought he was hearing from the people, that this confounded nonsense must stop. He was using the people's language, but he was making a fundamental point that colonialism is gone, is going, and a new day is coming. And the colonials must yield to an independent Guyana. And that the ways of the colonial world and the colonial ethos must give way to a new ethos. This confounded nonsense must stop. And that political saying has lived through the years. 70 years later, people of certain generations, remember, the young people are now catching on to it. Later on, Forbes Burnham would say, we have a destiny to mold, a destiny to mold, an independent destiny, a destiny to mold. The destiny of independence, as I've explained many times, must mean freedom. It's interesting that in today's Guyana, something is happening that people may not take notice of. Donald Ramotar is doing his best to keep Cheddi Jagan's view of the world and his contributions to Guyana's independence alive. He's perhaps singular in that. Roy sometimes, but Ramotar more. Jagan's party has moved on from Jagan. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Workers' solidarity, socialism, Marxism. The present PPP has moved on from Jagan. And Ramotar is trying to keep Jagan alive in the consciousness of his supporters and the wider country. Vincent Alexander has the Burnham Foundation, trying to keep Burnham alive, Burnham's destiny to mold, trying to keep in the consciousness of Guyana Burnham's worldview and what he stood for and his contribution to Guyana. And in a humble way, perhaps not in as grand as the other two, I have dedicated myself to keeping the legacy of Iyusi Kwayana alive. The three of them are what I call the early pioneers and architects of our independence. Jagan's workers of the world, unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Kwayana's this confounded nonsense must stop. Burnham's destiny to mold. They represent three pillars of our independence. Three pillars of our independence. Jagan calling for working class unity. Kwayana signaling a resistance call, an in-your-face call, telling the colonials where to get off. Stop this confounded nonsense. And Burnham later on, a destiny to mold, grappling with the reality of governing an independent Guyana. And when you take those three pillars and you put them to Guyana, you get a sense of what the early pioneers envisage our independence to be. Please hear me out tonight. It's not easy talking about these things because I'm going against some popular view. First of all, I'm saying that people talk about Burnham and Jagan, and it's easy to say Burnham and Jagan, you know, one Indian, one African, and the story done, you know. You don't have to think through anything after that. But I'm saying that there were three tendencies in our early independence ethos. And they were represented by Burnham, Jagan, and Kwayana. When we talk about Burnham and Jagan, we divide our country into binary. And we don't leave any space for independence, independent thought. That is what Kwayana was saying. He was saying to the white man, get off. Is it surprising that as we navigate our oil and gas today, there is a tendency, there is a view in Guyana that is saying to Exxon and the white people, get off, this confounded nonsense must stop. It is the Kwayana ethos. Those who are grappling with how do we build a nation in the face of the onslaught of oil and gas, a destiny to mold. And there's still some of us who are saying that the workers of Guyana must unite across racial lines and ideological lines. So I'm saying the early intellectual authors of our independence, represented by Burnham, Jagan, and Quayana. And note I say represented, because Burnham had people behind him, a phalanx of people. Jagan had people behind him. Quayana had people behind him. And so as we grapple with 60 years of independence, we go back to the source and the roots. And we do so in an honest way, not a way of excluding, but a way of including. A proper understanding of where Guyana is. Means that we must reach for the strands of our independence in order to understand our independence. Many of you were surprised to know that the person who coined the term the Cooperative Republic was Quayana. The person who wrote the party songs for the PNC, the PPP, and the WPA is Quayana. The person under the PNC who was in charge of land reform, who contributed to the coming into being of the Cooperative Bank, is Quayana. The person who led the Black Power Revolution in Guyana is Quayana. This is taking nothing away from Burnham and Jagan, but I am positing a broad understanding of our independence. A broader understanding of our independence. And so when we come to do an assessment of this independence, we are doing so from a deeper understanding of the historical development of the independence movement. This confounded nonsense must stop. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. We have a destiny to mold. One of the problems of our independence in Guyana, one of the failures of our independence, is that we instinctively exclude rather than include. All three of those brothers sat at the table in 1953. A golden year in the annals of our history. Burnham, as chairman of the party, correctly argued that he was the leader. Jagan, as the legislative representative, argued that he was the leader. There was an impasse. Martin Carter and Rory Westmus suggested Quayana as the compromise leader. Burnham said, I will support him. Jagan remained quiet. Quayana, in his modest way, Sidney Kingdon, said he would not accept if one of the major leaders did not agree, because he did not want to be seen to be taking away the leadership from an East Indian. The rest is history. Sidney King could have been the first premier of Guyana instead of Jagan, had he been more bullish. We have to understand our history, because sometimes we think the history is a straight line. And because of the way in which our independence is developed, those who are Burnhamites and those who are Jaganites digging their heels, understandably so. And therefore lose sight of the broader independence ethos. As I said, I trace my tradition back to the Guyana ethos, this confounded nonsense must stop, which was the radical cry of independence. You didn't talk to white people in a certain way at that time. Malcolm X was doing it in America, talking back to white people, chatting back to white. He was thrown out of the Nation of Islam. Because when Kennedy got assassinated, Malcolm said, the chickens have come home to roost. But saying white people been killing black people all the time, and now they're killing them their own. The leadership of the Nation of Islam threw him out for that. They didn't like the fact that he was talking about white people that way. Guyana is talking back to the white man in a way that Jagan didn't, and a way that Burnham didn't. Burnham would talk back to white people when he got power. And so the resistance tradition in our independence can be traced right back to that statement made by AUC Guyana. A destiny to mold the status, because Burnham is now governing and is laying out a status view of independence. We have to mold the nation. Jagan, of course, coming back to Guyana in the 40s, steeped in communism and communist literature, was echoing Karl Marx, who in the 1840s, in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, said, workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. So we have the resistance tradition, the class tradition. I'm going to talk about Jagan's class tradition later on. And then we had Burnham later on with the pragmatic tradition. Burnham was a pragmatist. And he had to be, because if you're governing, you couldn't govern during the Cold War. You couldn't govern a multi-ethnic society unless you were going to be pragmatic. So when Burnham talks about the destiny to mold, that is the pragmatic tradition of Guyanese politics. You see, I'm wanting us to understand why we are where we are today and why we have survived 60 years, but why we have messed up in 60 years. I heard young Dexter Todd last night doing his first podcast, and he went somewhere that others who were closely aligned with the PNC would not go. He argued that the people who are leaving the PNC, he was making reference to the recent group that left. He argued that these were people, if they were steeped in the ideology of the parties, the ideology of the PNC, the ideology of the PPP, would examine their action. And I think implied in his argument was that political activists, for the most part today, are not guided by ideology, but they're guided by a transactional understanding of politics. Because if you were to ask them, what is the founding ideology of the PNC, they wouldn't be able to tell you. What is the founding ideology of the PPP? Well, those in the PPP is a lost cause. They've moved on. They now embrace a transactional, I don't want to call it capitalism, but a transactional kind of bastardized capitalism. Because it's not even classical capitalism. And so I'm saying Dexter Todd is hitting on something. Ideology, of course, is that cohesive set of ideas and values that shape one's understanding of reality and the world. And without that, you're politically dead. Without ideology, you are politically dead. And there's a kind of political death that is abroad in Guyana that's nauseating, and that explains a lot of what is happening in the country. I listened to the current crop of PPP members, most of them. And I gather they're good people, so I'm not saying they're bad people. But they're not guided by a deep sense of what Guyana is and what Guyana's place in the world is, and what are the values that must guide Guyana. They're not steep in that. They're not ideological. And so we have new generations that are coming on the political scene devoid of ideology. You listen to them and you can't tell what is their understanding of the world that we live in. What are the values that are driving their participation in politics? You know, someone leaves a PNC and goes to a PPP. And they tell you, well, you know, I feel comfortable in the PPP. What's that? What? I can go in the PPP and I have friends there, and I will feel comfortable being among my friends in the PPP. But if I look at the way in which the PPP is governing Guyana, the policies and the thoughts that go into the policies, I can't be comfortable because it is against my own political values. So when people tell you I'm comfortable in the PPP, they're not talking about ideology and political values. They're not. They're talking I'm comfortable because I'll get a $10 million contract. I'll be rich tomorrow. And I'm saying this is not necessarily their fault. It is the way Guyana has developed in the last 30, 40 years. We are developing new generations that are not thinking critically about our country, where it came from, where it is, and how we navigate the present moving into the future. And we have suffered as a country because we have not been able to utilize the best in us, because we are not reaching for the best in us. What Burnham meant by a destiny to mold, it's the title of a book of speeches that is edited by Kit Nascimento and I think Mr. Burroughs, published since I think 1970. Do young Guyanese, do young PNC members pick up that book and study it and ask themselves, what is the political philosophy of the founder leader? It's all good and says Burnham was a great man. And I hear that a lot from PNC supporters. Burnham was a great man. He was a visionary. And you ask them, name a deep philosophical contribution. They will tell you about the bridge and the highways and so on. Fine. But what was Burnham thinking? These bridges and highways arose out of a particular thought, a particular view of what Guyana ought to be, a particular view of our independence. The PPP is building bridges too. They're building roads, more bridges and roads than Burnham, because they got more money. But I'm arguing that the thought that drove Burnham to do national service, to do bridges and roads, was different from the thought that is driving the PPP to do bridges and roads. And I'm being a teacher tonight. So I'm saying to my PNC comrades, because we are comrades now, it's easy to talk about the roads that Burnham did and things, but we have to go deeper than that. What motivated him? What was his thought process? Because, like I said, these are building roads too. And I'm arguing that part of our independence failure is our inability at some point to continue the intellectual development of our people. And I'm not saying academic. I'm making a distinction between those of us academics who write books and teach at university and intellectual, which is about generating ideas and thoughts. An academic could be an intellectual. There are academics who are not intellectuals. And there are intellectuals who are not academics. And it is that failure over the last 30 years, 40 years, under the PPP, to de-intellectualize Guyana that has partly gotten us in this mess, where we have present generations that see the world transactionally and not see the world in a transformational way. When somebody's telling me, and I hear some men who should know better, telling me that Irfan Ali is a transformational leader. They either don't understand the meaning of transformation or they are dishonest. Irfan Ali is, God bless the young man, he is thrown into the deep and he is managing to stay afloat. There's nothing transformational about Irfan Ali. Irfan Ali is not grounded in any ideological strain. The ideological strain that made Irfan Ali, he has ditched it. And so the brother is rudderless. And somebody's telling me that he is some transformational, transforming what? From what to what? And again, I don't mean to be unkind to Orphan, but Orphan belongs to a generation that has been cheated by the PPP. And it starts with PPP members, but it affects all of us. And so we are here at independence. We came into independence in 1966. And I want to deal with this seriously. Between 1961 and 64, Indian people and African people killed each other, killed one another, brutally, civil war, violence. So we came into independence in 66, bloodied ethnically, bloodied, and we forget that, we gloss it over to our peril. It is one of the failures of our independence that we tried simplistic ways of dealing with a deep ethnic problem. We slaughtered each other on the simple but fundamental question. Independence is coming, the white man is going, who governs? You see, when we were fighting colonialism, the question was not who governs. The question was survival in a hostile colonial world. And so Africans and Indians found ways of confronting the common enemy, the colonizer. But as the colonizer is leaving, the question is no longer coming together because the colonizer is gone. The question is, who governs now? Who takes over from the colonizer? 1953 was an experiment. It was handled badly. My elder Kwayana suggested to the two major leaders in 1953 that they should contest enough seats not to win the election, but to get representation in the National Assembly. And what was his thinking? He said that he didn't think the races were matured enough as far as their unity was concerned. And that if you try to win, then the two races will fight over the spoils of office. And so he suggested to Burnham and Jagan that maybe they should not try to win. They should try to get enough representation in the National Assembly. Both Burnham and Jagan didn't agree with him, and they won the election. The British came in, dethroned them after 133 days, and within 2 years, the PPP split. Burnham gone his way, Jagan stay his way. Kwayana was right. Because as soon as they won, the Indians wanted their leader to be in charge, and the Africans wanted their leader to be in charge, because they won something. And Kwayana was insightful. He said, maybe you shouldn't try to win. Give the unity enough time to mature. They didn't. They split in 55 and split again in 56, and the rest is history. We are still suffering the scars of that split. Because some people say it was an ideological split. Burnham was moderate, Jagan was communist. That is true. Burnham was moderate, Jagan was communist. But that wasn't the reason for the split. The reason for the split was ethnic. Here are two groups of equal strength in the society. The white people are going, and the two groups are asking, who will govern? Because the British gave us a system in which one must govern. They didn't give us a system where both will govern. And so it became a zero-sum question. Burnham left. Quayana, Martin Carter, and Rory Westmus left 2 years later. The question was, who governs? Jagan used the system in 57, the PPP. As soon as Quayana left, Quayana and Martin Carter left, in came the Indian business class. Here are Indian businessmen joining a communist party. Go figure it. When Jagan was asked about that, he said they're patriotic. They're patriotic capitalists. If capitalists are joining a communist party, the only thing can gel them together is the race. And as soon as they came in, Jagan gave them prominent position. C.R. Jacob, Edward Biari, Balram Singh Rai. In 1957, Buxton to Kitty constituency, Jagan offers Quayana the chairmanship of the party and to run on the PPP slate. Quayana said, no, I'm running as an independent. And Jagan said, we will fight you, comrade. And he puts Balram Singh Rai, who was an Indianist, to fight Quayana. I will fight you. A right-wing Indian to fight a left-wing African. Jagan is left-wing, but he puts a right-wing Indian to fight a left-wing African. Go figure it out. Go figure it out. 57, PPP win using the system. In 61, PPP wins again using the system. Almost equal in vote, but because of the first past the post system, the PPP wins. Quayana sees the bloodbath coming. He says Indians don't want to be ruled by Africans. Africans don't want to be ruled by Indians. Let us have a joint system. A joint premiership where Jagan and Burnham are co-premiers. Jagan said no, Burnham said no. The PNC threw Quayana out of the party. Actually, he would later go to the mall and say if the PNC put a crapo vote for it, although they throw him out. And so after the 61 election, when it was clear that an Indian authoritarian government was developing, the country blew up. Who governs? In 1961, Quayana is saying joint premiership. In 2026, 65 years later, the Carter Center is saying winner take all politics must go. And we must have a joint government. I am not embellishing Quayana over others, but it is my duty, as I said, I've taken up that task to talk about Quayana's contribution as a pioneer of our independence, to give us a broader understanding beyond the Jagan-Burnham binary. And at some point, I hope that Donald Ramatar and Vincent Alexander and myself can sit down and talk about these three pioneers as brothers to give our country a broader understanding of the thought processes that went into our independence. So between 61 and 64, the question of who governs was played out in blood. In blood. Indians can tell stories of African brutality, and African can tell stories of Indian brutality. Guyana will later on proffer the notion of no guilty race, saying that both races were aggressors. In 1961, Indians were the aggressors. 62 and 63, Africans were the aggressors in Georgetown. And 64, Indians were the aggressors. And Guyana comes up with the thesis of no guilty race. If you listen to some Indianists and PPP people, they will tell you that it is Africans who were guilty. It is Africans who beat up Indian people and killed them. My brother has just published his book on the Mackenzie riots there, Betoram Ramarak. And I think I have a sense of the slant he's taken in the book, but I haven't gotten a copy yet. But he has taken the slant that it was Africans who beat and chased Indians out of Mackenzie. He called it ethnic cleansing, that Africans cleanse Indians out of Mackenzie. He doesn't take into consideration that the African reaction was a reaction to Son Chapman, in which Africans were blown up in a launch. See, it's the way in which we silence one part of the story to make one race look guilty. And my elder Guyana says no guilty race because both races were aggressors. I was just in Linden there a couple of weeks ago, Christiansburg, and some of the people were telling me that people are still alive who, during that episode, they sheltered Indian people. They put them up in their homes so that they will not be assaulted. Those stories are not being told. But the fact of the matter is that we entered independence as a fractured, bloodied polity. The Amerindians were there in the interior, and so they were not part of the coastal story between Indians and Africans. Amerindians in 1968, 69, some of them would seek to secede to Venezuela, which means that some of them didn't want to be part of Guyana. And this is how we went into independence, and we gloss it over. As if we went into independence holding hands, singing Kumbaya. No, we did not. And one of the, if not the most important task of independence was to heal those wounds. And to heal those wounds, you had to go to the question of who governs. You had to settle that question. We came into independence with a PNC UF government, black people and Portuguese people. And we can say the Amerindians who were then represented by the UF. We could have said that they were part of that governance structure. But Indians didn't want the PNCUF government. They didn't. And they made sure that that government didn't work. They undermined it at the level of the economy. They undermined it at the level of politics. As happened when a government is under siege, the government buckles down. Then came my tendency, the radical tendency, which is saying we have to break with colonialism. And that these governments in the Caribbean, they are not breaking with capitalism, they're not breaking with colonialism. And so we went to the government. So the PPP is going at the government for ethnic, political reasons. The WPA comes on the scene and is going at the government for ideological reasons. The quarrel with Burnham is that he was not moving the country quickly away from colonialism. Burnham was being pragmatic, as Eric Williams was and Barrow was and so on. But we in the left felt that pragmatism was not the answer. We needed radical transformation. So the 70s became this collision where the Burnham government is under siege ideologically from the WPA and racially from the PPP. And our institutions were not mature enough to deal with those disagreements. And so it became personal because we didn't have the institutions to answer the questions that were being posed. The questions that were being posed by the WPA, questions that were being posed by the PPP, questions that were being posed by the PNC. 1970 revolution in Trinidad. Askew went to Burnham's residence and asked, will you make it possible for black people to work in banks? And Burnham said, well, I already have black people working in banks. And I think Guyana defended Burnham. He said there was no black power revolution in Guyana because the PNC had taken steps further in the Caribbean on the question of black power. They asked him if Rodney were to come to Guyana, if Rodney would be allowed to work. He said yes, but he didn't keep that promise. The point I'm making here is that we did not have institutions to deal with the collisions and contradictions of the 70s. And so the government became authoritarian, the opposition became more radical, Indians lost faith in the PPP to take them out of the mess that they think they were in and that they were in, and some of them drifted to the WPA. The more radical sections of the African population would drift to the WPA, including members of the army and so on and so forth. And like in the colonial world, the post-colonial world, the contradictions of the 70s are still not yet discussed in a real serious way. Some people say, you know, the WPA was wrong to oppose a black man and to throw him out of office. I am prepared to listen to that argument because there is some validity in it. Some people say whatever Rodney would have done, as a black man, a black leader should not have given the green light to kill him. In fact, the green light should have been, do not kill him. We used to laugh on the streets because sometimes the rest of the WPA leadership would be beaten up and they wouldn't touch Guyana. And we used to say, well, Burnham gave the orders not to touch Guyana. The thing is that those who were doing the beating up didn't need Burnham to tell them don't touch Guyana. Those who were doing the beat up thought that Guyana had good obia, good spirit bunny, and they felt that Burnham would not have agreed with it. So they never used to beat up Guyana. And so sometimes followers do things that they expect leaders would want them to do. So the 1970s, we made some serious mistakes on all sides. All sides. Burnham Jagan was more loyal to international communism. He was more loyal to the ethnic dynamics, the ethnic logic, which says, I'm a communist, but I can't win an election based on communism. I can win an election based on race. So he was a communist who mobilized based on race. He preached class ideology, but mobilized based on race. Burnham later became an avowed communist in the Declaration of Sofia in 1974. He said, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. So we had a country in the 70s where the three major parties, PPP, communists, PNC, Marxist-Leninists, WPA, independent Marxists. And they're fighting against each other. They're all Marxists of some sort, but they're fighting against each other, which says to me that the problem was not really ideology. The problem was something deeper than ideology, because they agreed ideologically. All three of them agree with nationalizing bauxite, nationalizing sugar. No quarrel. My only time where I was in any gathering with the PNC, the PPP, and WPA was in 1983 when the Americans invaded Grenada and the PPP, PNC, and WPA were in front of the American embassy picketing. My only time when I saw all three of the parties together, agreeing on something. We have to know the truth of our independence. We have to know the truth of our leaders. And God bless Ramatar for what he's doing to keep Jagan view alive. God bless Vincent for keeping Burnham contribution alive. And I hope God bless me for keeping Guyana's contribution alive. But it is when we look at the coming together of those strands, and we saw those strands clashing in the 1970s. The only thing the PPP and WPA agreed on was the removal of the PPP PNC from office. Beyond that, they didn't agree on much else. They didn't agree on much else. The PPP said the PNC was a creeping dictatorship. The WPA said it was a full-fledged dictatorship. They didn't agree. All they agreed on was the removal of PNC from office. All three of them, I am arguing, some one more than the other, or two more than the other, but all of them made the error of substituting class and nationalism for the racial divide. The WP had a better grasp of the racial divide because that's what brought it into being as a party. But I think at some point we felt that we had overcome race and that Africans and Indians were united, and we were going to have this ideal country. And so we campaigned on the multiracial ideological platform, because Indians felt that Jagan was not going to be able to remove the PPP, and some of them went over to the PNC, led by Chandy Singh, etc. And some came to the WPA. The PPP was weakened. There's always been that radical strand in the African community. And this goes right back to slavery. So you had places like Linden and Buxton and South Georgetown, some of the African villages on the East Coast and West Bobbies, where Africans turned their backs on the PNC. But once election came back in 1992, the Indians went back to the PPP and the Africans went back to the PNC. The WPA was weakened. Those who are trying to deal with the wind phenomenon today must read this history. They must read this history. Those who are crying that the PNC is dead and the PNC must do this and must read this history. They're called dead on the PPP because Indians felt that the PPP couldn't remove the PNC, and so they went to the WPA. Africans today feel that the PNC can't remove the PPP, and they're going to vote for win. You have to read history. Between 1960 and 1970, the UF came on the scene. UF was actually part of government. By 1970, UF is gone. The logic of the politics put an end to the UF. Up came the WPA in 1974. Glorious period from 74 to 92. Elections come 1992. WPA is wiped out. The AFC comes into being in 2006. Africans went to them, gave them 5 seats. Then some Indians joined them, give them a couple more seats. Today, 2026, 20 years later, the AFC is dead. Not dead. Yeah, I mean, they're still wrong as an organization. The WPA is still wrong. The AFC is still wrong. I don't know about the United Force. But the shine is gone. Up comes win. We have always had these third parties. Because what I'm gathering from young Africans is that they don't feel that the APNU has what it takes to deal with this rampant PPP. And they felt that Mr. Mohammed could do it. And some of them went and voted for him. History will tell whether they were correct or not. I don't know. All I'm saying is the United Force came for 10 years, vanish as a force, not as a party. WPA was there for about 18 years, vanish. AFC for about 15 years, vanish. There have always been times when our people have experimented with third parties. Many people feel the WPA should not even exist today. We exist because we come from a tradition. This confounded nonsense must stop tradition. So what keeps us alive is that we represent a pole in the political tradition of our country. We articulate that resistance tradition. And so I am saying, those who are saying the PNC will die, and they don't know history. They don't know Guyana. When you're in opposition in a winner-take-all system, is hell. When Arthur said that to be in opposition is like being in hell. And when the government has the resources to use in a transactional way against your supporters, then it makes it even more difficult. But once the system settles down again, as it did in 1992, Carter came, the PNC decided, well, we're done with chicanery. The world has changed. We have to go to open elections. And Africans say to the WPA, all you can win. So I gone back to the PNC. Indians said to the WPA, all you can win. I gone back to the PPP. Just as the AFC supporters told them in 2025, your failure to join with the PNC and WPA and others, you can't win. 0 seat. It's the nature of our politics. The nature of our politics. Read your political history. And I don't mean read it in a book, but know it. And people like myself have a responsibility to teach it. I may be a little bit biased sometimes in my analysis, but my facts, I hope, are consistent. My analysis of the facts may be biased, and I make allowance of that, but the facts are the facts. We are back where we started at independence. The fact that Aubrey Norton could be deemed unelectable because he's black skinned, because he don't smile. So the angry black man. And you hear black people with it too, yeah? You hear black people with it. The fact that we face that in 2026 shows that we haven't moved beyond 1966. Because the question in 1966 was, what about these dark-skinned people who you can't put in bank because they don't smile? Their skin too black. And in 2026, we are delegitimizing a political leader because of his black skin, because of his poor black roots, because he don't smile. And we are saying that we have advanced in independence? A certain political activist called me a week ago, and we began to talk, and I told him plain that he was part of a cabal that didn't understand history and couldn't postpone their personal dislike for Norton. When the wolves were at the door, when half of the society is rallying around their dark skin, Indian. Now, Irfan is not no Chamar and so on. They rally around their dark-skinned Indian. But some of our political elites couldn't understand that their problem with our dark-skinned African could be postponed, that 2025 was not the time to fight it. They didn't have the sense of history. They didn't have the understanding of the racial dynamics of our country. They didn't understand the unfinished question of who governs that is still there. Indians has a better sense of it, the Indian leadership. And they rallied around their dark-skinned Indian who don't smile. And our black elites didn't understand the moment. You know, if you don't like a man because of his leadership style, you don't like a man because he don't smile or whatever it is, you know, those things are neither here nor there for me. But you had to have the presence of mind to understand that you're at a critical moment where this country is awash with money, and it will determine who owns Guyana in the next 50 years. And you were prepared to gamble it away because a man was too black, you didn't like his leadership style, and all the nonsense that were proffered. I ain't saying that people shouldn't have the problem with Norton. I disagree with Norton on many things. And if you're red skin and you don't like black skinned people, I ain't not even quarreling with you. But when you're going to make a fundamental decision about who governs based on those things, then you have retrogressed as a group. You have retrogressed as a group. And you don't have an understanding of your own independence. Because you have gambled. I noticed my sister. Amanza. I love Amanza. And she knows it. But I noticed she's saying that Parliament hasn't met for 90-odd days. And I have to say, I give you my solidarity, sister. But you must know that the logic of what happened at the election in 2025, that logic has taken us to a point where we have a government that's not calling Parliament. And you know why they're not calling Parliament. They're not calling Parliament because some of us encourage black people to split their vote. And the splitting of the vote means that the PPP archenemy is now the leader of the opposition. And the PPP using his power to punish all of we. Don't pretend that you all don't know why Parliament is not being called. Parliament is not being called because some of our leaders encourage black people to split their votes. Black people split their votes and was instrumental in making somebody the opposition leader who the PPP now hates. And the PPP is punishing all of us for a decision that some of us in the opposition have to make. So I love Amanza. But Amanza, my sister, don't pretend that you ain't know why Parliament is not being called. The logic of what some of us did. I'm not saying that people should not have voted for Win. That's not what I'm saying. People have a right to vote for any party they feel like voting for. But if you can vote for Win as Win, and then vote for APNU as APNU, and FGM as FGM, and Liberty as Liberty, and you get the kind of division you now have, what this breakdown from a major opposition to 3 minor opposition, it means that you give more space to the government. Including using its power not to call Parliament. So, yes, protest. Let the white people know that Parliament is not called, but tell the Guyanese people why Parliament is not being called. It's not being called because of some political miscalculation on the part of some of the leaders on our side. That's the origin of it. And that's why I'm saying these conversations are painful for me, because I can't go along with the status quo. I can't. This confounded nonsense must stop, leads me to make this kind of analysis. That yes, the PPP is governing in a brutal way, but this idea that we were going to create a minority government, if we split up African votes and hope that some Indians will come along and some Amerindians will come along, it backfired. It backfired. And we must say that. Amanza must say that. To not say that is not to be as open as you ought to be. The problem is the divided opposition. The PPP squeezing as it in balls. And in squeezing his balls, they're squeezing all of us balls. Don't pretend that we don't know that. The ideal world, you know, if Azadin and Win and FGM and APNU and everybody had gone into the election together, AFC, if we had all gone into the election together, the outcome, I am almost certain, would have been different. But we went in fighting one another for the same vote. I know of households where some voted for Win, some voted for APNU. We were fighting for the same vote. And the outcome is that the PPP gets stronger. Jack Yo says, we have a majority of 7. You don't have no majority of 7. You have 7 more seats than the combined opposition. A majority is 32. 33 is a majority. Don't get into the mathematics. 33 out of 65, you get 36. Really is a majority of 4, not 7. Our independence we made some errors. We look at perhaps the most racialized society in the world. I have had a chance to travel the Caribbean. I've had a chance to study societies like Guyana. And Guyana is among the most racially divided countries in the world. Yet we use every other tool to analyze Guyana except race. Except race. Major error. Major error. Burnham tried to use the state to bring the races together. Genuine, he tried. I think after time he gave up. The PPP never tried. When they came back to office, they decided we're not going down that road of bringing no race together. We are going to go for Indian supremacy. And that is why they Holland, David Hines, and people like me, when we talk about race, they don't want us to talk about race, because when we talk about race, we're skinning them up. Because they're using race, but they're calling it something else. But it's race. And then they get African people to say, well, it's not about race. It's not about race. It's about something else. So when we go to vote, we're not thinking about our racial survival. When we go to vote, we are remembering that is black people, children who gonna get gunned down by these people we put in, we vote for, some of them. People now buying one tennis roll, loose tennis roll. And I ain't saying Indian people ain't buying loose tennis roll, but I'm sure more black people and Amerindian people buying loose tennis roll than Indian people. It's not that all Indian people are rich, but because the Indian party controls the state, it makes sure that more crumbs go to Indian working people than African and Amerindian working people. So whereas Amerindian and black people buy one tennis roll, the Indian may scrape by and buy 2 or 3, or maybe the whole pack. That's the reality of Guyana. But Africans have voted, some Africans have voted for an Indian leader. An Indian leader who never, since he the elections are over, ever uttered the word African, ever went out there and says, I am fighting for African people? Never, never. And he wouldn't. Why should he? He got free votes. He never promised African people that I go and fight for you all. Never. The brother, Mohammed, is basically using what has been given to him on a platter. Can't vex with the man. People still meeting me and say, Dr. Hines, you know, when black people going to stop suffering? And some of them vote for me team. But they can't go to the win that some of them vote for and ask win to fight for black people suffering. They can't. And they know that. They know that. And because we never dealt with the question of race in a serious way, not the PNC, not the PPP, the WPA to some extent dealt with it, but I think ultimately we moved away from a racial analysis to a purely class analysis, although embedded in it was the question of race. I think WPA did better on the race question than the other two. And so because we didn't give our nation a popular understanding of the notion of race and how it determines what happens in Guyana, then we paid for it at the 2025 election. APNU paid for it. The PPP is much more clever at dealing with race because the PPP, the Indians have institutions that are grounded in race. The Hindu temples and so on, where the whole question of caste and so on, Indian history and the remnants of caste give Indians a sharper sense of race. And so they don't necessarily have to depend on the political party to teach them about racial dynamics. They have a better sense of race and racial solidarity than Africans. And so Indians may vote for other things, but they vote for Indian solidarity. Africans, a good portion of us, were prepared not to vote for racial solidarity. So we voted for transaction, but we want racial solidarity at the end of the election. That's the mess we found ourselves in. And I don't blame the voters. Voters deal with what is before them. They deal with what is before them. They deal with what is before them. So I don't blame the voters. I blame our leadership for not being honest on the question of race. We're not honest on race. I am aware as a political leader of sorts that sometimes my colleagues would prefer I am not around. Because if I'm around, they have to confront the question of race. And they don't want to do it. Because there's this notion that if you deal with race, you will lose votes. And so sometimes I know that they would rather me not be around. Because I don't have to open my mouth. My very presence raises the question of race, raises the question of African dispossession, raises the question of African-Indian relations, raises the question of Amerindian condition. Our independence did not adequately deal with the question of race. And so what we have in 2026, after 60 years of independence, is an Indian business elite that has captured the Marxist-Leninist party. Between 1957 and 64, they came into the party, but they didn't capture the party. The Jagans and the communists remain in control of the party. This time around, the Indian bourgeoisie class, the Indian business class, a lot of people in that class are grounded in Indian supremacy. They have captured the PPP and in effect captured the government and the state. And they're using the government and the state as leverage to give the impression that people love them. These conversations, like I said, are painful sometimes, but we must have them. We must have them because we have to level, we have to recognize our mistakes. I think between 2015 and 2020, the coalition government, which I think of all the post-independence government, that government had the best opportunity to make a breakthrough on the question of race and governance. But because collectively that government did not understand its own mission, things fell away. I love Moses, I love Kemraj, but I always thought that once you got power in 2015, Moses and Kemraj should be living in Indian communities. Living in Indian communities, trying to convert Indians to the idea of a multi-racial state and society. That Africans needed to live in the African communities to convince Africans that the time has come where equality and equity could be real for them. But we didn't. We treated the whole nation as one nation. We didn't understand that Africans were enslaved, and so their growth against the state is grounded in that enslavement. They have a historical growth against the state, the colonial state and the post-colonial state. Indians came not as slaves, as indentured laborers, and so their growth comes from their experience of indentureship. Amerindians faced genocide, but for the most part, they were confined to the bush, the interior. And so their growth with the state is different. You see how Amerindians dealt with the state? They wanted to secede. Go away. And so each group comes to the state. Each group relations with the state is different. And unless our governments understand that and govern with that in mind, we're always going to be in trouble. We're always going to be in trouble. Independence at 60. We are keeping on. As I've said, never forget one thing. And that is that we have survived. Whatever else, well, despite all the challenges, we have survived. Remember where I start. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Chedi Jagan. This confounded nonsense must stop. Kwayana. We have a destiny to mold, Burnham. You put those three worldviews together, and you have a sense of where our independence started. I love you all, as always, and we got to keep doing this. because a brighter day is inevitable.